The deep state wants you in a constant state of fear to keep you under control. So they foster all these lies, one of which is these psychiatric drugs cure something. They don't. They just tamp down symptoms. They cure nothing. It's like trying to get rid of a magnetic field by pouring Thorazine on it. It's not going away. It's an energetic force, just like these voices that schizophrenics hear. They're energetic beings. They do not respond or run from physical drugs.
Welcome to the Consciousness of the Way. I'm your humble servant and seafood, Taoist Master San Qing. And we have a doozy today. I'm very grateful that this incredible light being, furthermore, by the name of Jerry Marzinsky, who is a MACE practitioner, but furthermore has spent his lifetime exploring and helping people find themselves and reuniting with the truth, God, the knowing of who they are, and the power of now. Welcome to the podcast, my dear friend.
It's good to be here, son.
It's very exciting. You had me at hello, but why don't we just do an abbreviated version of how you got to this moment?
Well, that's a long story. It's a long story. I started out after I got out of graduate school. I went to work at one of the maybe the largest psychiatric hospital on the planet.
Right.
It had close to 10,000 mental patients there, of all kinds, in Milledgeville, Georgia. That's where I started work and started studying, noticing a number of things that just didn't match up with what I was taught in graduate school or in undergraduate. And it was like, one thing I hated about psychology is you had no access to a clinical population to see if what they were telling you was true or not. You couldn't go into a mental health center and say, hey, I want to work with some of your people, see what's going on. They won't let you into a prison. They won't let you into a state hospital. In the entire 45, 50 years I spent working in psychology and psychotherapy, doing crisis and in emergency rooms, I never, not once, saw a researcher on the front lines on the clinical front lines ever. They all came from the universities, which were taken over by, the Standard Oil guy. I forgot what his name was. Back in the 50s, I think it was, with the Flexner report, where they bought off Congress to pass this law that said if you did not graduate, if a medical student didn't graduate from a university that taught pharmacology as its basis, they wouldn't allow them to give them a license. Right. So that knocked out naturopathy. It knocked out the Tesla's violet ray. It knocked out acupuncture. All other forms of psychotherapy or aiding anyway psychologically were thrown out, by this. Forgot what that guy's name was. He was a Standard Oil guy. But yeah, they took over medicine then, and then from then on out, they ran it. If you don't practice medicine the way they think you should, you don't get money, you don't get grants, you don't get students, you don't get to publish in articles, in journals, and they got these people publishing what they want published, which is not always the truth. Big pharma, they'll sell you anything you'll eat. So, I watched what was happening, and I could see that something was wrong with the schizophrenics, and that the voices they were listening to seemed to trigger that. If they're listening to the voices, then they start behaving weird. And I would ask people when I first got there, what do you think causes schizophrenia? I'd ask psych nurses, I'd ask psychiatrists, psychologists. Most of them would say it's a biological imbalance in the brain. You know, that's what I was taught in graduate school too. You know, but the longer I was there, the more evidence that I saw that there was no baseline for that. So psychiatrists would bring these people into their office. They would listen to them for 15, 20 minutes, and then they would prescribe some kind of medications that they thought would work. There was no baseline. So how did they know what chemicals are out of balance in the brain if they don't have a baseline? If they don't have some method of checking what is the chemical balance of the brain now? It does not exist. It never has. This biochemical imbalance bullcrap was made up by Eli Lilly back in the 70s, I believe, when Prozac came out. They needed some explanation for why their drugs somewhat worked. They didn't have one, so they made one up. And it started with the antidepressants, and then it spread to the entire field of psychiatry. All mental illnesses are due to some kind of biological imbalance of the brain, but they don't have any evidence for it. It's since been disproved, but they got away with it for a decade or so. And before that, they got away with the genetic deal. Mental illness is due to a genetic malformation of some kind. They got away with that for about a decade or so. And then some geneticists finally got around to, hey, well, let's look into this. They said, well, we don't see any evidence of a genetic gene. It's just not there. Well, so here's Big Pharma and the psychiatric mafia go, well, it's not just one gene. It's a whole bunch of genes, and they're all mixed together, and they're interplaying in a complex way, and we'll understand it one day, but we don't right now. All right. The geneticist kept going. We don't see any evidence of a genetic cause for mental illness. So that went down the tubes. Prior to that, they were blaming mothers. They didn't know the cause, so they were making one up. Then came the chemical imbalance thing, and I see that. Well, it didn't make any sense. So one day I asked one of the psychiatrists. I said, what are you treating? How do you know if it's a chemical imbalance? How do you know what's out of imbalance or how much if you don't have any kind of lab or test to check for what's out of balance? He goes, oh, well, we just trust the pharmaceutical companies to tell us what's going on with these different, mental illnesses. And I'm like, oh, what are you talking? I couldn't say that to him, but I'm like, that's like, letting the fox loose in the hen house. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, and I can see that. What's with this? So that's what they were indoctrinated with. That's what they came out of medical school with. That's what they're still publishing in the journals. It's like now on their advertisements for psychiatric goods, they go, "Oh, it is believed that this mental illness is due to a chemical imbalance of the brain."
No further inquiry, no further research, no further understanding. It's absolutely appalling. It's ridiculous.
Well, it is. I mean, they've scammed the entire Western world with this. So that biochemical imbalance is a sham. It's a lie. There is no evidence for it. It has been disproven at this point many times over. So that was one. So here's what a book called what is it? It's a psychiatrist who's high up in the profession debunking the chemical imbalance theory. He said it was not until the late 1980s, after the release of the landmark antidepressant Prozac, that the idea of the chemical imbalance hit the psychiatric mainstream. As a psychiatrist, Peter Brigham in 1991 points out in his book Toxic Psychiatry, that's what I was trying to think of, the drug company Eli Lilly advanced the chemical imbalance theory as a marketing scheme to sell their new drug Prozac. There was no demonstrable evidence showing that depressed patients had any imbalance, but Lilly ran with it. Before long, psychiatrists and psychiatric patients alike came to identify with the idea that mental disorders were caused by a chemical imbalance of the brain. It's a complete lie. It was a sham. And they're still fostering it today. You know?
Wow. Yeah.
They did it for profit.
Well, it always is. I mean, as long as I've bared witness to the human condition coming up front and center with the realization of who they really are. From a Taoist perspective, we call it Shen, the spirit, the true identification and knowing who you are, not as limited to this flesh and blood, has been an ongoing thing for thousands of years. But furthermore, the last 30 consciously as a priest, I witnessed this, people were afraid of the prison, their mental faculties, their capacity, as it was told to them that there was something fundamentally wrong with them in their mind, in their brain. And, that's not how we roll within ancient indigenous rituals for Taoism. We just exercise these energies. Anytime I've ever come across anyone that has had traits of that, I'm witnessing a dialogue with something that is ominously overshadowing the individual. And I can see it. I can see it because I'm trained in sensory perception. So seeing entities and auras and all kind of stuff is kind of a normal day in the office for me. To see that and then have someone in absolute fear wanting help. And, today there's a different story. Now, 30 years ago, it was about an exercise of self-realization and transmuting that energy and giving them a path of repeatable communion with spirit, with God, with their higher knowing. And today, a lot of people tend to get involved with, they discovered they can channel some type of entity. Next minute, they're talking to the Palladians and they've got 100,000 followers on YouTube. Different story today.
Yeah.
Completely different.
Or they're talking to some demon that captures them later.
Yes.
So yeah, these voices that the schizophrenics hear are energetic entities.
Yes.
They have intelligence. They're moving to take over the person.
100%.
I
was just going to say I attribute it to, and I have always seen that, is their inability to turn it off. So you're getting a sensory perception, a developmental skill, but you're unaware of the magnitude of it. So there could be the smaller voice, the bigger voice in your mind, and you can hear it auditorily, where you are now having conversation clearly with something. This is how I am. And I'm far short of 3 cents short of $1 or crazier than a shithouse rat. I am very sober and very clear and have been in communion with my teacher for 30 years. And I see him like I see you. I hear his voice. And the information is evident from an ascended point because it's only of the higher well-being and knowing of humanity. It doesn't come from a low frequency state.
And you look at the the scope of it. There's over 100,000 Americans diagnosed schizophrenic every year. It's every year, 100,000. The schizophrenic rate is 3 to 5 times that above the general population.
Mm-hmm.
So they kill themselves at a much higher level. But then again, so do psychiatrists. Their rate is just right under that, just a hair under that rate. They don't know what causes schizophrenia. It's the leading cause of death for schizophrenics, and 4 out of 10 will attempt. All right. So here they are dishing out these toxic psychiatric drugs, that aren't curing anything. All it does is tamp down symptoms and turn these people into zombies. The antidepressant market in the U.S. is expected to reach $15.98 billion by 2023. Not billion, not million, billion. Okay.
Well, we're in 25, so it's already happened.
It's already happened and passed it.
Yeah.
The global antipsychotic sales was expected to hit 14.54 in 2021 and expected to reach 15.5 billion in 2022. Billion. Okay? Nobody's getting any cured by these drugs. Matter of fact, they found that they are toxic. They actually rot out your neurological system with long-term use. You know, and so they're doing damage. They're doing permanent neurological damage. And these guys, I've never seen a psychiatrist tell a patient that, inform him that with long-term usage, you're gonna get, darting of the tongue and shaking and uncontrollable nerve twitches, akinesia. They don't tell them that. They don't warn them. They don't tell them how dangerous these drugs are. And when I worked at the state hospital, when those neurological symptoms started to appear, rather than cut down on the medication, what they did was gave them cogentin to mask those symptoms caused by the psychiatric drugs. So here they were continuing to destroy the nervous system of those people and just masking the symptoms. And on top of that, they're feeding them to kids at a horrendous rate. These are toxic drugs. More than 7.2 million. Now this is from 2017, so it's much higher than that now. More than 7.2 million kids are on psychiatric drugs now, and that was as 2017. Over 622,000 are under the age of 5. They're giving them toxic, neurotoxic drugs under the age of 5. Over 80,000 of them back then were on ADHD drugs, which is amphetamine. And working in the psychology department of the prison for 17 years, there were scores and scores of prisoners who had started off on these Ritalin and Adderall, which are amphetamines, and moved up to amphetamine, meth, and then went nuts and ended up in prison. Now again, this is under the age of 5. Over 38,000 are on antidepressants.
Wow.
Which have horrendous side effects. Over 85,000 are on antipsychotics. Now, these are the ones that really destroy your nervous system with long-term use. They're giving them to kids. 85,000. Over 389,000 are on anti-anxiety drugs, and those drugs are addictive.
Wow. It's mind-boggling. You can't even measure it. These type of numbers are insane. I mean, they have this measure of delusion. Like, let's just get down with the brass tacks. You go and you give this offering of we need something as ridiculous as let's say gun control, and you go, okay, well, you want gun control. Let's take a closer look at that. Let's do logic. You have over 400 million people living in this country. You have over at least 1 billion guns registered, and you have incident of homicide or fatality in the neighborhood of 60 to 80,000 people. Homicide, only 8,000. So tell me how you give me the logic that we need to harness and control more things like guns when in actuality, it's a farce. You're manipulating the system. Furthermore, this would be given evidence in this conversation when you have people that are looking for help to understand where it is that they're attempting to find answers, and their answers are being basically masked with this nonsense that is having dominion over their neurological system that would then start to show evidence within their biological state and their physical state and diminish rapidly. I mean, once you start shutting the nervous system down, you can have a myriad of different, what they would call autoimmune diseases that are not really definable. That's why they call them an autoimmune disease. It's wild.
Yeah, and then you got what they're doing with these violent video games and these movies and shows on television. By the time a teenager gets the age of 16, he's watched thousands of murders on TV, war stories, and these violent video games that are basically saying, hey, this is how you solve your problems. Go out and get a gun and shoot somebody. and then they want to take the guns away.
Right,
You
right.
know,
I
they
mean,
should outlaw that kind of crap. You
well,
know,
it's like desensitizing and removing people from empathy, right?
exactly right. You know, no gun ever shot somebody by on its own. I mean,
Right.
somebody was behind that trigger.
Right. I mean, it's like the fractionation of this information is what is the seed of social media and the demise of the human awareness of unity. So when you fractionate something and you're like literally watching, these shorts that are 1 second long or 5 seconds long, 1 minute you're getting a dopamine release of puppies licking their kid's face. Next minute you're watching someone get hit by a car. Next minute it's an explosion. This is social media. This is the cycle of information, how to manipulate the mind. And
Right.
so you get these absolutely obscure dopamine hits, and you wonder why someone is then controlled by the interweb, and they find normalcy in this type of information. So furthermore, as you said, the video games, and endless amounts of pornography, all this stuff starts to feed into the very foundation of the human being. And so at a very young age, adding psychotic drugs that supposedly give you control over your mental emotional state, which it does not, you have a buffet of absolutely insane possibilities that can take place from the person who's being misguided, almost as if they're being manipulated. Really, it's kind of strange, that, isn't it?
Yeah. And big farmers behind it all. This is also from the toxic psychiatry thing. It said the influence that pharmaceutical companies drive for profits are having on every aspect of medicine is so blatant that you'd have to be deaf, blind, and dumb not to see it. Adding, we have just allowed them to take over, and it's our fault, the whole medical community. To this day, there exists not a single biological test for any mental disorder, despite the psychiatric mafia's claim to the contrary. That wasn't their words, that was mine. There's not a single peer-reviewed article that can be accurately cited to directly support claims of serotonin deficiency in any mental disorder, while there are many articles to present counter evidence. Jeffrey Lacasse, Jonathan Leo, Serotonin and Depression, a disconnect between the advertisement and the scientific literature. You know,
So I mean that right there is a falsehood and a lie, because the second you open your eyes up, you create that as a human being. That's your biological right, is that infrastructure within your body, that if you are exhibiting light, your body will naturally produce that. That's just how it is. It's like another delusion by attempting to craft some definition where that doesn't happen. Well, that person would literally be dead at this point, because that's fundamentally how you activate certain brain waves, and then you put them into the fight or flight, right? It's one thing to be standing on planet Earth with the circadian rhythm of the Schumann resonance of a 7.83 hertz, and then which would be fundamentally your transmitted resonance if you were not dropping the template of your personality, your finite mind, your ego state. If you had nothing more than just transmit what is the resonance of the earth, you would hit that, and that's roughly between alpha and theta, giving yourself possibility of creative states of mind. Whereas now, we're looking at this manipulation. You open up the gateways to the beta state, and then you amplify it through drugs and other things that put you in that heightened 12 to 18 hertz sort of state, which then puts you in a state of fear and anxiety. You stay there, you live there, you nurture it, and the material just keeps making it more and more apparent to you.
right. And that's what they want, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
Yeah. The deep state wants you in a constant state of fear to keep you under control. So they foster all these lies, one of which is these psychiatric drugs cure something. They don't. They just tamp down symptoms. They cure nothing. It's like trying to get rid of a magnetic field by pouring Thorazine on it. It's not going away. It's an energetic force, just like these these voices that schizophrenics hear. They're energetic beings. They do not respond or run from physical drugs. So all those drugs do is tamp down the symptoms. They may weaken the voices. In some cases, they may stop them. But soon as the person stops the drug, which is with horrible side effects, they have terrible side effects, they're right back again. All right.
Yeah.
So these are energetic beings. So psychiatry and psychology are just not in the same ballpark. It's not in the same ballpark. So another big lie they fostered on the Western world is their diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders, psychiatry's Bible. I mean, all through graduate school, master's degree, PhD, they treated this like the Bible. You had to memorize these different psychiatric categories and the numbers and all this kind of stuff and the subcategories. It's all made up. There's a group of 13 psychiatrists or so that gets together every 3 years, and they make up new psychiatric disorders. And I've heard a report that it was like a tobacco barn. A guy comes in and goes, "Hey, man, I got a new psychiatric disorder. It's like selling tobacco at an auction," and they all listen to it and they think about it. And 2/3 of the people in there are highly involved with the drug people. So they think, well, can we make money off of this? And if they can, it becomes a new neurological disorder. It becomes a new psychiatric disorder. So their diagnostic and statistical manual is a complete work of fiction. There's not a single one of, I think there's 296 of them now. There's not a single one in the DSM-5 that can be tested by any kind of valid test. There is no test. There's no objective test. There's no lab work. There's no EEG. There's no EKG. There's nothing like that to verify a single one of those 296 diagnoses. They're all made up. They're all subjective, and that's how they treat them. The guy comes in, "Oh, I'm hearing voices. Oh, you got schizophrenia. Boom, take these drugs."
Well, I mean, I would love to have a conversation about the definition of psychosomatic. I mean, that's supposed to be a disorder. The truth is your mind is creating a visceral feeling in your body, but that's actually a connection, not a separation. But they want to keep it as psychology. I mean, it's a head screw.
Yeah.
I mean,
in 1952, there were 106 psychiatric disorders. In 1980, there were 256. Now there's 296. Okay? And they're increasing every year. They just make these things up as they go along, and then they publish them in their list of diagnoses.
It's absolutely criminal. I mean, when I teach people how to channel energy, you come across some people that are a low frequential state, and they exhibit that by the energy that they bring in. I had one situation. I remember inviting my mother to a channeling workshop I did about 20 years ago. I had about 40 students. And one of the students takes notes and asks questions. The other student embodies the energy and speaks through them, right? Now, if you're not completely imperium of your state, that could be problematic. If you're playing with this stuff and you still are under the construct of fear, it can invite things of a low frequency. I mean, it just is what it is. So this one girl started having this conversation, and I witnessed the energy move in her and around her and out of her. It was actually two different entities. And literally the conversation went south very quickly. The second she was speaking in a tone that was more like a young child, a girl. And then through my further inquiry, because I could see the entity merging into her physical body, that it wasn't that at all. And then it went really dark and deep and south. She spun around and threw herself across the room. And my mother went, "Oh, shit, this is real." Yes. She freaked out because this is very real.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very real.
I've seen it over and over again.
And people like that particular student would invite these entities, hordes of them. I would literally exercise 100 entities every time. At one point, I was like, listen, you need to decide what it is that you're doing, because this is an ongoing thing. Every week I see you, you're inviting these energies back. And there has to be a certain point where you take accountability for your behavior. This is not a diluted state. You know this. We've had this conversation. You're experiencing the effects of it. Now let's either help you, or you can just go about your business and bathe in this stuff for the rest of your mortality. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, the other thing I see is they seek out those who are psychologically injured, that have experienced significant, emotional, physical, or sexual abuse. They're kind of already injured. They're easier for these things to come in. So, from what I've seen, your mind is like a frequency. It runs on a certain frequency. These things don't like high frequencies. And if you've been damaged through abuse, they're attracted to that low frequency, and they'll come in there and they'll start pouring gasoline on the fire. They feed off of the negative emotional energies that they create.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've spoken to literally hundreds of schizophrenics, and they've all reported that after the voices attacked them, that their energy level went down to almost nothing. They didn't even realize it. They just felt so bad. They didn't realize it until I asked them about it. And then I'd say, well, where do you think your energy went? You were laying in bed all night, tossing and turning, being attacked by the voices. Did you use that energy? They go, no, I didn't use it. Well, where do you think it went? Well, I don't know. I don't know where it went. And then I'd ask them, well, if you stuck your hand in a fire 1,000 times and you got burned every time, what's burning you? They had no trouble with saying that the fire. But when I say, well, the voices have come tens of thousands times over the years you've been listening to them, every time they've come, you've been devoid of energy. Your energy was drained. Where do you think it went? Still an amazing number of them would go, I don't know. Some of them would go, did they take it? But they were being blocked from realizing that these things were parasites. And that was the last thing that these entities want them to know, that they are parasites, that they are feeding on them. If you had a big leech on you, you wouldn't just sit there and watch it. You'd do something about it.
Yeah.
Well, these things know that if the victim finds out that they are parasites and that they're feeding off them, the victim's going to try to do something, to try to do something about that. And they don't want that to happen. Matter of fact, I've had a number of prisoners when I worked at the prison ask these voices, who are you? What are you? They would say, we are you. So they wanted them to believe that voice they're hearing in their head was actually who they were. Very tricky, because what they do is they slip thoughts into your thought stream that don't belong to you. But since we think from the time we're little kids that every thought that comes through your mind belongs to you. It's not how it works. Thoughts are coming from the outside, both good and bad. Emanuel Swedenborg, Christian mystic, said you don't have any thoughts that belong to you. They either come in from heaven or they come in from hell. You're the chooser. You're the one who chooses which ones you're going to pay attention to. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I make it very clear. One of my teachers, the Jade Emperor, always reminds people, all thoughts of your mind are not yours. And then people are like, what? Well, then whose are they? Well, now that's to be determinative on what you are experiencing and where you're at in your own scale, from energy potential that is really morphed. If you look at it from a physics perspective, it's light to wave to matter to particle realized with your attention intention that is forming from what we call within Taoism, cutting from the cloth of perfection, the primordial mother, these distorted states, what we call within Buddhism, dukkha, distortion. This is a currency that we work with in this electromagnetism. This currency comes in the form of energy potential. And that energy potential will present itself as vibratory, frequential, and furthermore, if you hold the resonance, then it will be realized. And so if that resonance is low and it's an energy that's feeding upon your physical, mental, emotional state, you will see it. And that's a classic claim to any healer, light healer, besides therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, all these types of things. Same thing. How do you feel at the end of your day? I'm exhausted. Yeah. You're literally fodder for the great white. We're throwing you out there, and it's feeding on you. More commonly, I think Bob Monroe coined the term loosh, looshing from this state, and they're feeding from it. And when I find entities like that, I've only ever had one where it took me about 3 hours to negotiate with this energy, this entity, and most of them, they literally give the ghost up within minutes, because once you enter and adjust the resonance, they're like, you got me, that's it, I'm good. This person has now become even more whole. When you give them imperium over that, dominion over that energy, it restores their energetic potential. And so it's almost like the second that entity is gone, they get back more of themselves. Yes. And they're like, whoa, 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 I can feel this. I feel more full. I feel more whole. I feel more energized. And that is the evidence that you need to get to. And then furthermore, hanging out with you or myself, you teach people how to hold that resonance and make it a part of them, who they are.
Yeah.
So they can't creep in.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to stay on a positive spiritual path. Otherwise they'll be back. And one of the most startling things I found was that these voices don't sound, for the most part, like anything different than your regular thoughts. So you may have thousands of thoughts going through your head on a particular day. You know the tone of your thoughts. They don't all of a sudden show up and go, "We are the voices," and no, it's nothing like that. It sounds just like all the other tens of thousands of thoughts that go through your mind on a regular day. There's no difference in the timbre or the frequency or it sounds just like one of your regular thoughts, only it doesn't belong to you. Like it might tell you to, hey, why don't you drive into oncoming traffic, or you're standing on this bridge, I wonder what it would be like to jump off. Stuff like that.
Things that have imminent results, said harm or exhibit mortality, right?
Right.
I distinctly remember one woman that I worked with for 11 or 12 years, and I was constantly being a bridge between her and her own demons, where she would just want to, self-harm all the time. And like the thing that got her last was her sleep deprivation for several weeks. And I was not present. I wasn't available. She would never master it was more like a Band-Aid. I'm always bridging that gap, which is never good. You don't want to be the Band-Aid to their wound. You want them to heal their own wound. And, she would listen to the voices, and ultimately the voices said, hey, this is a great idea. And, the worst part about that was, even talking to her to this day, she's caught between what we would consider the light and earthbound, and is quite satisfied percolating, witnessing the diminished returns of her biological timeline. She was never happy. And she doesn't mind just floating around as an earthbound spirit and just, what's better? I don't have to deal with that realm anymore. I can just witness it, but I don't have to respond to the experience. I'm not responding anymore to anything. Nothing is having control over me, yet I'm not happy. I'm not sad. I am. And that is not a state of detachment that you want to be in. You want to have more of a clearest path. And, at the time, it just seemed, inevitable that this person would constantly sacrifice themselves. And finally, There was constant intervention where I would remove this, but then she would welcome it back in.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll go through all this out, and then I'll welcome the energy back in. And, it only took a minute of me not being available, and I was being the wet nurse, and she was not going to control this outcome. She wanted more victimhood. She wanted more dissatisfaction in relation to what she was doing. And now the sad part is, that old expression where, money can't buy you happiness. She was literally, a billionaire. Didn't matter. It had nothing to do with the money. It was just, she was so not happy with her incarnation and wanted out. But then here's the funny thing. Anytime I've ever come across someone like that, they always go, oops, my bad. I was just kidding. Because they do it for self-recognition. When they take, they're really playing with that. They want something in return. And I find people always go, I want back in. I was just screwing with you. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted approval. And now I cannot get back in. What's going on? And then you have to have that conversation with them. And that's even more disturbing because they were tricked by this voice that you're talking about. Go, hey, this is a good, you need to do this.
So were you talking to them in their spiritual form?
Yeah, in the spirit world. Yeah. I do that all the time. And so the most common error is they want back in. They go, I was only doing it because I wanted love. I wanted attention. I wanted people to acknowledge me and validate me. And I needed justification that I wasn't being heard. And so, in my business, oppression, depression, possession, that's how it works. Get someone and isolate them in their own mind, in their own environment. Keep them away from this stuff. That charge you and I get right now. This is a very knowing that, holy moly, we're at the center point here. And so, people that's really part of their demise is being told this idea. And I love the fact that you brought that up because people will believe that it's of their own mind. But if it's going to suggest self-harm, it is not of your own mind.
No.
Understand that to be very clear, no matter how much you want to get rose-colored glasses or, listen, let's just do this and it won't be permanent. We'll just sort of we want some attention. We want some love. I know you're feeling empty. I know this is going to help you find that. They're going to give you the love you need. They're going to give you the thing that makes you happy because they're going to acknowledge you. And, of course, that's the trap. Because they can't come back in. That's it.
And you might think, well, okay, if these things are feeding off of the victim, why would they want the victim to kill themselves? I had one fella answer that. He wrote me, he says, it's because it tears up the entire family. So the whole family is producing negative emotional energy for long periods of time. And
that loosh, as we put it, feeds off that. Yes. So it just becomes more of a, I had Bruce Lee come to me on his 50th anniversary of his death, and he went over the understanding of why he lost his life at such a young age. And furthermore, then his firstborn was taken from him. And it had to do with a curse that he was dealing with within his relationship with an energy that was giving him celebrity status, giving him this ability to be a superstar. That was what he desired. So this energy was coming in the form, just like you're talking about, where it's feeding his ego. And the more we give you these accolades and this acknowledgement of the environment, celebrity status, people know who you are, your currency, your what you must give us is the minions. All these people that are following you, we want to feed from their energy. And if you do not continue to your obligation with this contract, we will give you this state of immortality, but from a limited state. You will become famous, but you'll be dead. And he refused to surrender to this energy. And of course, the end result was said mortality. And furthermore, they're like, and because you were defiant in resisting what we wanted you to do, we will also take your firstborn. And you go, wow, And people, when they listen to that interview that I give, it's a mediumship. These types of energies, when they come knocking, I tend to have a conversation like we're having. I only embody or channel my teachers directly because I've been dealing with them for 30 years. When I get conversations like that, I had Elvis last week. These are interesting conversations, but it's like we're having a conversation across the table. I'm not about to embody whatever that frequency is, because sometimes they are actually, a lot of times they're elusive and they're deceptive. I had Dolores
very
Cannon.
deceptive.
I don't know whether you heard of Dolores Cannon, but she came to me. She came to me about a year ago, and she was in my ear for like, oh my goodness, at least 3 or 4 months. And I'm like, how do I know any validation of this information? You're claiming that people are not performing your therapy the right way, and this is why they're not going as deep into this somnambulistic state. And, how do I know? So through further inquiry, I had half a dozen of her students on my podcast, and they were like, wow, that's her. That's really her. But one of you said that she's not going to come back in that form. Well, no, because I had to do my own inquiry. I'm like, okay, you've got a ball pit. You're sitting on this soapbox. You're whining. I'm not your poster child. I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm not about to amplify that to the world. You've got to find someone else to give you that information. Furthermore, at that same time, I had this other guy, Art Bell, who came to me as well. And then it just gets better and better. If you leave the lights on, people are going to come knocking. But it's like you have to be absolutely fearless in your state. If you fear anything, don't even go into this space of any kind. It's not part of the remedy, my friend. The remedy will be your consumption. You will be consumed by something if you have any fear.
Well, that's exactly right. And even if you're fearful, you can't show it. I don't know how many times working psych crisis where these guys were just totally out of control. And you just can't show that fear. You just can't. It helped me that I was an adrenaline junkie. That helped a lot. But
right.
Yeah, you look at what psychiatry is doing right now. It's in the United States. I mean, so you got more psychiatrists, more psychologists, and more psychiatric drugs on the planet than in the history of mankind. Mm-hmm. In the United States, 50,000 people a year. 50,000 every year, year after year after year after year. So what are they doing? The Western mental health system is a joke. It's a sham. It's a lie. It's fabricated. It's fabricated for the benefit of psychiatrists and drug companies. It's not for the people. It doesn't cure anything. None of these mental illnesses are cured by any of these drugs. And the effects are very toxic. The common side effects of antidepressants: nausea, weight gain, trouble sleeping, dry mouth, blurred vision, dizziness, anxiety, headache, diarrhea or constipation, sexual problems, fatigue, tremors, increased swelling, lowered alcohol tolerance, bleeding, lower sodium levels, vomiting, restlessness, muscle cramps, and seizures.
I mean, it's an onslaught of the deconstruction of your mitochondria. That's what's going on. It's an attack of the fundamental structure of your energy potential by destroying it at a subatomic level and infiltrating the neurology and destroying that, because that's your tuning fork. That's the evidence of what is true and what is not through your experience. And it's not in the mind. Nothing comes from the mind. It's like that finite state is your discerner affirmant, but it's bankrupt. Intellect is bankrupt. It will keep repeating the same thing because it has no reference. It has no information. It's not a storage bank of knowledge that you can reference. It's just a basically an empty, vacuous state.
And you look at the extent of this nonsense overall. The number of children and adolescents in the U.S. on psychiatric drugs is 7,213,599 and growing. More
Wow.
startling still are the number of kids on toxic antipsychotic drugs, which has been estimated at 1,194,805. Right? This is massive. This is and growing.
Wow.
And they've got the entire Western world believing that this is the way. This is how you treat psychiatric illnesses.
Well,
And
and they try and rap your knuckles, right? It's like, hey, you can't use the word depression. You're not a certified psychologist. If you use that word, you are in jeopardy. I'm like, really?
oh yeah, they try to. You try anybody who calls themselves a psychologist and hasn't graduated from a PhD program, they'll send you a threatening notice. It's like, oh, we're psychologists. We know something. I spent 2 years in a PhD and supposedly one of the best PhD programs in the country. Those people didn't know anything. They didn't know anything. It was a bunch of intellectual horse crap. When you got onto the front lines, nothing they taught you made any difference. People weren't getting better based on what they taught you. So it was like, and on top of that, the people who run this entire crazy system, the suicide rate is 5.9 times that of the general population. These are the people who are running the mental health system in the West.
Well, this is a fundamental problem with healers. When they turn up on my doorstep, because the Taoist alchemy that I train people in is the energetic infrastructure of how you find things tangible within this material. It's a process, a method, and it can't be repeatable. It can't be verified unless through a self-mastery, a self-realization. So you have to be able to experience it, and for it to be true, it doesn't mean whatever's going on here is temporary. You need to be able to have this, what they call an ideomotor response, a divine spark of self-realization through the visceral physical state. That's why destroying the nervous system is a fantastic way to keep people offline and completely deluded, because they can't then validate this experience. So, I mean, my goodness, this is, if you had $1 for every time someone would attempt to commandeer, but it's the true nature of stuff, which is that they are attempting to separate you from your knowing, your spirit, the God fractal of who you really are. And it will constantly be the onslaught. And these entities are minions that work through these other minions that call themselves authority. And that authority is the very problem. It's like once you attempt to create that authority and someone is suggestible, if you're emotional, you're suggestible. I mean, that's just it. That's just how it works.
Well, say they got the whole Western world believing that the voices schizophrenics hear are auditory hallucinations.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't done a single study on these voices. They have just, like the Egyptian priests of old, we hereby declare that the voices are auditory hallucinations because we said so. Right? So when I got into working at the big psychiatric state hospital, all these patients were hearing voices, and it was like, I was wondering, well, what are they saying? At first, what we're taught in graduate schools that they're hallucinations. So I believed that, But then once I got onto the wards, I saw that those who were listening to these so-called auditory hallucinations were the ones that were getting in the most trouble. They were the most violent. They were the most upset. So I was wondering, well, what are these voices telling them? So I'd start asking people, and they go, "Wow, we don't know. They're hallucinations." So I thought they were like hallucinations. You think they're like word salad. They don't make any sense. They're just gibberish. No, they're not. I slowly learned that they were speaking to these people in full recognizable sentences. It was like listening to a telephone conversation. And you're not in it. You're standing by. You hear the person talking, but you can't hear what's coming back over the line.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw patient after patient yelling at his voices, arguing with their voices, talking to their voices, and it was a coherent conversation. There was one lady that the voices were telling her to get out of the hospital, and she's walking off of the hospital grounds while arguing with her voices that she shouldn't be doing that. You know, so it was like, well, what are they saying? Nobody cared. Nobody was interested in asking any of them what the voices were telling them. So I started asking them, you know, what are they telling you? And it was always negative. Whatever these voices were saying was negative. It was the first pattern that I noticed. And I'm like, well, if they're hallucinations, what's holding them on a continuous, unshakable negative pattern? Why aren't they, if they're hallucinations, why aren't they all over the place like hallucinations are? Why aren't some of them positive, negative, neutral? Why aren't they all over the place? No, they were consistently negative all the time. The question became, what held them on that negative trajectory? How come they weren't random? Okay. So that was my first question. The next one that came up was that they were anti-religious. I had one guy come to me one time and he said, uh, I said the 23rd Psalm last night, and the voices reacted like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. So I started asking other people, hey, take the 23rd Psalm, read it every time the voices come, and tell me what happened. So they'd come back and they'd all report they hated it. They got mad. They got negative. They started screaming. They didn't like the 23rd Psalm. They don't like when these people read the Bible. They don't like when they go to church. They don't like them reading any spiritual material whatsoever. Why would a hallucination have any problem with somebody going to church or reading the Bible? But they're consistently anti-religious. They didn't want them practicing any spiritual practice whatsoever. Matter of fact, I did a little study on it, and I found if the voices were weak and the patient went to church, the voices would shut up once they were in church. If they were of moderate strength, they would get louder and try to drown out the preacher. They'd mock the preacher and say, what makes you think Jesus could save you? He couldn't even save himself. I've heard that come from the voices a few times. If they were very strong, the person would get up and actually run out of the church. All right. So why would a hallucination be anti-religious? The third category I saw was they would foster and create negative emotion. They never made the person feel good. It was always bad stuff. You're no good. You're rotten. You're ugly. You're stupid. You're worthless. Nobody likes you. Even your mom and dad abandon you. I mean, it was always negative stuff that generated negative emotion. And then that negative emotion would disappear. So here they were creating negative emotion to feed off of the negative energy of these patients. So they were doing what we do to cows. They you feed cows, put them out in the pasture, they eat grass, you bring them back, you isolate them, you milk them, and put them out there again. That's what these entities were doing to what they do to us. Everybody gets hit by these things. It's not just schizophrenic. Every nasty negative thought that comes through your mind belongs to them. All right.
Yeah.
So they energetically drain their victims. So pattern after pattern after pattern showed up. And they kept going. They get louder after sunset. They get louder if they're ignored. They foster negative and destructive behavior. They foster isolation. They demand the victim's attention. You can't ignore them. They get louder. They maneuver for increased control. They gaslight. They manipulate perception. They have complete access to the schizophrenic's memory. They can pull up any rotten thing he's ever done and say, hey, you did this thing. You're a rotten person. Remember when you did this? They demand that the victim not tell others about their presence. So that it goes on and on and on. There's 23 of them. You can go to my website at jerrymarzinsky.com. You can go to articles and then go find the patterns under articles. Right. So if these things are running patterns, they're not hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia insists. And what was even more interesting is when a patient went and told one of the psychiatrists that I was asking him about what the voices were telling him, I ended up in the psychiatrist's office the next morning on the red carpet being ordered never to ask a psychiatric patient again about their voices because I was reinforcing their hallucinations and making them worse. That happened twice. The psychiatrist didn't want anybody asking about what the voices were telling them or looking for patterns.
Of course, that's more evidence, right? You don't want more evidence. You want to keep that person. You're deluded. What you're experiencing is of your mind, and you're just imbalanced. And the more
Right.
we give you these drugs, the more you will find balance, and everything will be all right. Don't worry about it. I mean, it's criminal. It's criminal.
Yeah, and then they're telling them, well, they may need to be on them for the rest of their lives, that there is no cure for schizophrenia. There is, you know, it's like Dante's Inferno, where they have that sign over the door going, all who enter here give up all hope. You know, so that's what they're telling these people. The voices tell the victim not to tell anybody about them. Right? They tell their parents, and they say, if you tell anybody about us, they're going to lock you up. And unfortunately, that's what happened. They tell their parents take them to the psychiatrist. Psychiatry puts them on medicine. If they go off the medicine, they hospitalize them. They get locked up. So it's exactly what the voices are telling them that it's going to happen to them, happens to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And then they have the gall to tell these patients, well, this is a lifelong illness. There is no cure. The only thing that you can take are our drugs. You know, completely ignorant of what the voices are, and it's the voices that cause schizophrenia. It's not any chemical imbalance. It's not any genetic anything. It's not mothers. It's the voices. It's these entities that are talking to them in their head that the psychiatrists don't believe exist, nor do the psychologists. You know,
well, they don't want to admit it. They know they do, but it doesn't serve them, and their position of authority diminishes because they don't have an answer. They're not prepared.
No, they don't have an answer, and I don't believe they know it. They don't want to know it. I think they're a little bit afraid of these people because they're being assaulted by schizophrenics at a rate higher than the assaults on almost anybody else. You know, psychologists and psych nurses and matter of fact, they're assaulted at about the same rate as attendants on psychiatric wards that are with these people 24 hours a day. And they're only spending, at the state hospital, they'd spend 15, 20 minutes a month with them, maybe. On a regular private visit, you might get, 50 minutes. And they're being assaulted at a rate higher than the people that are working with them 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And that I found out that was because they're dishing out these medications which the voices don't like. They don't like them because it's interfering with them exerting their full control over the patient. So what these drugs are, they're major tranquilizers for the most part. They down the person so they can't get upset. And the voices want them upset. They want them angry. They want them furious. They want them paranoid. These drugs kind of turn them into zombies, and they can't get the loosh out of them that they normally can without the drugs. So they get the patient to attack the psychiatrist. So I think psychiatrists are a little bit afraid of these people.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you ever witness it, when I do an exorcism, it's just like out of the Hollywood movies. You'll see the complete unraveling of that energy and that spirit from the physical body. No question. It's like that's being exercised. And, that's the difference is when you connect again their unification, that entity does not have dominion over them anymore, but it's from the unification state. And there's a ritual for the exhuming that entity, and then furthermore connecting them so that they're at one with God, universe.
So how do you go about doing that?
It starts with finding that center point. So within an energetic structure, you are looking at the first 9 energy centers within the physical body, which would be more familiar with 2 transpersonal points and 7 chakras within Hindu. Within Taoism, we call them dantians. They're the energy elixir, the energy center. And you can quite clearly see excess and deficiency, it comes in a seesaw of that polarizing dualistic effect of emotion to virtue.
And so you boot these things out. How do you keep them out?
Well, that comes deep within the magic and the connection that you have with this person. So anytime I see someone who's possessed, their chakras are locked up and it's black. It's completely black. It's ominous black. And you can vaguely see the color of these energies or the chakras centers underneath this. It's like a snake-like energy that just constricts their ability to tune in to these different frequencies. It goes all the way up, and what we call the Bayak way is completely shut off, which would be the connection with God. And so by exhuming them, then you give them specific magical rituals that I have been handed down for thousands of years within Taoism. They are gone, and that person gets complete dominion on their physical body and their reconnection with God. I've done it so many times. I've done it hundreds of times. And it's never a return.
If you can do that, I can send you a lot of people.
Yeah.
And what's your success rate?
So far, 100%.
Oh, yeah?
I've never had a return because this is deep. This goes back thousands of years. This is not something to play with. One of the first founders of one of the monasteries I was ordained in, he was an exorcist. That was his specialty. That was it. I mean, this goes back thousands and thousands of years. This is not delusional. I mean, I have dear friends that are Catholic priests, and we go on little hunts all the time. And I could give you hundreds of examples of them doing exorcisms on people. Stuff is real.
I know it is, but I work more with the damaged part. Trauma is the root cause of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, of course. That's the entry level.
And it also affects the mind. So this Mace energy system I was telling you about.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, it's a brand fairly new, cutting edge energetic psychotherapy. So it's not a talk therapy. The therapist doesn't have to know what the trauma was. It still works. All right. So your mind is energy, your thoughts are energy, your memories are energy, your spirit's energy. It's all energy. And here's the psychiatric mafia pouring drugs on top of a magnetic field, an energetic field, and expecting it to dissipate. It doesn't. It's like if you had a magnet and you were pouring Thorazine on the magnetic field, expecting it to disappear. It's not going to disappear. So John Mace, who came up with this system, he wasn't a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a priest. He was a master mariner. He was a ship captain. He drove these big freighters back and forth across the ocean. He always wanted to know what causes, mental illness. And he found that there was a one-to-one correlation between the existence of mental illness and trauma. Physical, sexual, emotional trauma. Okay? So what happens in a trauma is that all your attention is turned on you during the trauma. You're looking for a way to survive or understand it. Okay? Mm-hmm. And you will make a decision in the midst of that trauma, and you don't make good decisions during a trauma. So you will attribute that trauma to something you did or something about yourself, and it will be a mistake. Okay? So the trauma is very painful, and it just stays there. It just won't leave. So after a good while, the ego shows up and says, hey, listen, I'll help you with this. And it takes it and it stuffs it in the subconscious mind, and then it locks it down so it can't get out. But it's buried in there, but it's buried alive. Okay? And it's pushing to get out, and the ego's pushing to keep it in. So you have an energy ridge. Okay? So that's energy that's coming from you that's wasted, keeping that energy ridge, that locked in trauma that's still alive, buried, so it doesn't torment you. Okay? So that turns into what we call a negative identity. It's like a computer virus operating in the background of a computer. You can't see it, but it's affecting the computer. This thing is in the background of your mind. It's operating continuously. You can't see it, but it affects your behavior. And the way it affects your behavior is like anybody who's like the person that traumatized you, somebody like that shows up on your psychological realm, that this thing reacts. It triggers, and it goes, that guy's no good. You might not even he might not even have to open his mouth. You can just feel it. You don't like this guy, right? And then he opens his mouth. You see he's like this buried stuff. You don't realize that. You just realize you don't like this guy, and your ego tells you to either attack him. There's a fight or flight response. Either attack him, run from him, or avoid him. Okay? But the universe keeps sending you people like that over and over and over again. So no matter where you go, somebody like that shows up. And here's the ego going, well, here's another one. So after a while, that thing is triggered so often that the person just goes, well, that's just who I am. I don't like these kind of people. When they come around, I don't like them. I don't want to be around them. I don't want to talk to them. I don't want to deal with them. That's just who I am. Right? But it's not. It's this buried garbage in there. And it keeps triggering, and it'll trigger for the rest of your life every time somebody like that comes around. So that's one way it shows up. You can't have something like that running in your subconscious mind without it manifesting in physical reality. Right? So it has its effects, and they're not good effects. The other way it shows up is you get into a jam, and you've been in that kind of jam 5 or 6 times before. Right? And you swear, I'm never going to get into that jam again. I don't care what happens. I'm not going to let that happen again. 6 months later, you're right back in that same jam again. You go, how did I get there? I swore I wouldn't let that happen. And here it is again. Right? That's that negative identity, that subconscious program running in the background. Okay? It's not going to stop these things from happening until you go in there and you drain it. Okay? So it's what May's called a negative identity. You have 2 kinds of identity, positive identity and a negative identity. Okay? He says that's why regular psychotherapy fails, because it doesn't take the identity into account. Not so much worried about a positive identity. You have a positive identity as a car driver. Okay, remember when you first started driving a car, you had to pay attention to every little move you made. Now you get in the car, you're thinking about something else. Your car driver identity is doing all the driving, and you're thinking about something else until you find, hey, where am I going? And then you get back on track again. So that's your positive identity. The negative identity does the same thing. It's running subconsciously. Right? Now, it gets all its energy from you. Every time it triggers, it takes more energy. The more it triggers, the bigger it gets, the stronger it gets, until it starts taking over your personality. Right? It starts manifesting in everything you do. Right? So what Mace found was it's energetic. It's running on energy. It is energy. It's a thought. It's a belief. It's energy. He saw that when you get a car battery, if you charge it up till it's totally full, but if you drain it till it's totally dead, you can't charge that battery up again. It's dead. It's completely dead. So Mace found that there's a way to discharge that negative energy in that negative identity. Okay? That negative identity has to be located and its components outlined. Okay? Once that happens, there's a way to connect it to spirit. Now, spirit is positive. This energy is negative. If you connect the two, negative energy is attracted to positive energy. So Mace found that you can both find the location, and that was what he worked on last. In the last several years of his life, is like, where in the ego and the subconscious did the ego bury this negative identity? Where did it put it? It could be anywhere in there. Okay? He found you can find it with a image that describes this negative identity. That's also its location. Okay. Now, he also found that the mind doesn't do all the things that what we classically think the mind does. He found the mind only takes pictures of where you put your attention. It doesn't do any analyzing. It doesn't do any talking. It doesn't do any thinking. It doesn't do anything that we attribute to the mind. Doesn't do. It only takes pictures of where you put your attention. Right? And we think, most of us think in pictures. If I say the word apple to you, what comes to mind?
Apple.
What color is it?
Red.
There you go. So if you locate that negative identity through an image, now you have an energy to work with. That apple you saw and its color is an energetic image that you saw in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
It required energy. This negative identity is energy. So what Mace does is he outlines the components of the negative identity, turns it into an image, hooks it up to the spirit through attention. Okay, you focus your attention, and the spirit will actually drain it. That negative energy will move because it's attracted by positive energy, and it will be taken in by the spirit and transmuted into positive energy. Once that negative identity is drained, it's gone, and it's permanently gone. So the person will remember even the worst trauma, and you ask them, well, how do you feel about it now? And they go, okay, I remember it, but it doesn't bother me. And that can happen in an hour. Yeah. It's very powerful stuff.
Yeah.
And I've never, in my entire career, I've never seen anything work like it. So I read everything I could find on it. And then one day, out of the blue, this guy contacts me and he goes, hey, I got somebody that you should meet, or I'd like you to meet. And that was very different from the kind of emails I usually get from people, And he goes, at the very worst, she'd be just a jolly old lady that would be harmless. And I'm like, he wants me to meet a jolly old lady. So that got my interest up. I'm like, okay, I'm going to look into this and see what, because he wasn't asking for anything for himself. He's going, I think you need to meet this lady, and it wasn't a crazy lady. It was a jolly old lady, So he puts me in touch with her, and it turned out to be the chief training instructor for the Mace Institution in Australia. So we started having some really deep conversation, and I had already put the system basically to work from what John Mace wrote. But she said, well, why don't you become a Mace, get your certification? And I said, well, why should I do that? It's already working. She said, you only have the tip of the iceberg, And so I said, well, okay. So went and took the course and became certified, and working with people every day where massive trauma is taken away. It's gone, inside of an hour. It doesn't come back. There's no hocus pocus. There's no chakras. There's no Christian stuff. There's no God. So anybody who's worried about, oh, you're doing something demonic, there's no religion involved. One side is pure physics. It has to do with the flow of energy, the electromagnetic fields, the energy around wires, and he had all that background from being a ship captain. But he was also a very spiritual person, and found that energy in the person travels from negative to positive. Okay. So that's probably why the negative entities didn't want people going to churches. They didn't want them reading the Bible, because that was sucking that energy away from them. So it's pretty amazing stuff. Right now, there's only 50 of us on the planet, but it's growing.
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable how once you find that center point, so you create that dialogue, and you're literally creating ideomotor identification of the ideogram that will give you information of where that center point is, wherever it is on the body.
Well, there's no dialogue with this system. I don't have to know what the trauma is, which helps a lot.
No, it's not about what the trauma is. it's all energy potential. So you're finding it on the body, and you're extracting it.
Well, it's energy. It's not a negative entity. That's a whole different category.
Well, no, I'm saying it's energy, but you're finding it on the body, and you're extracting it from wherever that might be, whether
well, the
it's
spirit,
here or here or
yeah,
here or
right.
here.
And it will build up in different parts of the body also. Okay, so and it's not me that does the extraction. I just make the connections. The spirit does it. Spirit will extract it and transmute that energy, and the person feels more energetic afterward. They feel lighter.
They're having dominion back over their body, so they're
Yep.
reinstating, and it's like all of a sudden it's energized again, and you become whole.
Right. They get closer to who they really are, but it doesn't get rid of. Well, sometimes it does, weaker ones or ones that they misinterpret as a negative entity. But what it does do is it drains the stuff, the food that these negative entities feed off of. So if a schizophrenic can concentrate well enough to get through this, it will weaken the negative entities by removing their food source.
Yeah. It's fascinating. It can transmute in many different ways. You could look at this as a variable. I mean, how I do it is isolating the entity and then extracting it with no return, which sounds very similar to yours, only it's just a different method. I mean, there is a levels of identity and that sort of like response within NLP to some degree. They have their own way.
Well, what do you charge for doing that?
It could be problematic for most people, so I offer it as my contribution to humanity. Quite frankly, that type of stuff I don't mess around with. I offer it because there's a place of healing. But yeah, I could be a rather expensive proposition. So when it comes to stuff like that, I don't even put a price tag on it. I just help people liberate themselves.
Well, I can send you a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's exciting when you see the change because this type of stuff is it's immediate. Like you said, an hour. The fastest response I've ever had is like 60 seconds. It happens quick. It's not, you got to remember, trauma in, trauma out. The trauma didn't happen. It's acute. It's a trauma. It happened instantly. It wasn't something that was nurtured over time. You have these highlight events within the human timeline. It's a cluster of a thought, feeling, and emotion that is being fed from this entity. And so it is just palpable. And so as quickly as it goes in, it will remove itself just as quickly. You just have to use the right method,
Well, if you can keep them away.
Well, yeah. I mean, that is.
Now, do they have to do anything specific to keep these things away?
No. I mean, the only thing they need to do is maintain their own connection. Once that's open, that's going to be wide open. They'll have so much energy that it won't know what to do with it.
Well, a lot of schizophrenics don't believe in God. They don't want anything to do with God.
Right. Well, this is an energy. Like I always remember, Taoist alchemy is energy. Now, you're going to have to come to the conclusion, if you even get to a point where you're exhuming something, they're believing in something. They're not a nihilist. They're having some. If they're even contemplating interacting with yourself or myself, there's something going on there.
Well, there's something going on, but psychiatry's got them believing that their mind is broken and that they're nuts. So they're spinning in circles. What's going on?
Right.
What it's me. I'm broken. The psychiatrist told me my mind is broken, and I'm going to have to take these medications for the rest of my life. So they're fostering the problem.
Oh, absolutely. But the second you show them their return to normalcy, or thereof, retaining their own embodiment and imperium over themselves, if it's temporary, it's given them evidence of a result. So now it's about an identification or accepting what has just taken place.
That's a big problem for them.
Well, if you get bodied and your energy returns to you and you're level-headed and there's no more voices because it's exercised, there has to be a level of validation. There has to be an accountability for your own behavior at some point,
right?
Because you are still part of this. So if you're not able to at least acknowledge that, holy crap, I don't have any voices. I mean, it's been a week, it's been a month, it's been 6 months. What's going on here?
Well, I've seen them go away and be, stay away for months and then one day just return.
Well, it's about whether that person is also, so you've removed the trauma, but was it the actual trauma that is necessary for it to return? It would have to be invited. It's not something that would just like reappear because there's nothing to do, because they're bringing their frequency down. That would invite this energy straight back in.
Well, even getting rid of them doesn't bring their energy up to where it should be.
Oh,
they're still low.
No. That is, you have to example what I'm talking about, because that doesn't return. They are empowered. The energy comes back. Their energy system is clear, and they have a direct connection, as they should be. So now it's about validating the experience. Like, it's happened so many times over my lifetime. When someone is empowered again, it's impossible to ignore that. You're not being plagued by this entity because you're maintaining a resonance that cannot be penetrated.
Psychiatry is going to hate you.
Well, I guess I'll join the same place you're in, because
yep. We're in the same boat.
Right?
I'm on one paddle, you're on the other.
Right, but because this is the truth. But nonsense.
I'll tell you what. If you're willing, I'll send you some patients that are a little bit too touchy for me. I'm working with the negative identity stuff, clearing that. But what I'd like to do, if you're willing, is to send you some of these guys who would be willing to speak about their results with you. Okay.
Sure.
And then bring them on to YouTube.
Sure.
You willing to do that?
Yeah, you're dancing a fine line. How long both of us will be on YouTube will be questionable.
Oh, I've been threatened by YouTube more than once.
Yeah.
They almost threw me off once. I got thrown off of Facebook. But to have, what we could do is make that as a requirement. Would you be willing, if Sand can get rid of this thing, and you're free of it for a certain amount of time, would you be willing to speak up to speak about that?
What would be the most appropriate remedy? Would be to put it on a neutral platform like Rumble, where you could go, hey, you want this full conversation, go to Rumble. And so you're not limiting the boundaries of this limited platform that you get information out there.
Well, I don't think they're not going to throw your whole platform off. They'll just threaten you with that one video. They'll take that one video off.
Yeah, why would you want to do that? I would shorten the conversation to just allude to, you want the full conversation. This is how a lot of people do. You want the full conversation, go to Rumble.
Well, I've put a lot of videos on YouTube saying basically what I told you today.
Yeah.
And they haven't thrown them off. But you mentioned anything about the virus or anything like that, you start that right away, man. They must have
about the AI.
AI searching for that kind of stuff. But I haven't had any. They have a big platform. They have one of the biggest out there. So
we'll find a way around it. But also understand this: when you throw the chum in the water, those entities will do their best to diminish our voices. because
they do
that,
that all the time. They interfere with my podcasts all the time. The video goes out, the sound goes out, the sound on the other end goes out. It's constant. I mean, it's constant.
well, once they get a taste of whoop ass, when I cast magic, there is no coming back. You step into that field, it's like a rebound effect that comes back to you ninefold. So these type of energies don't really hold, they don't hold any sort of like constitutional weight in this space when it comes to the magic component. But the magic is a knowing, and it's palpable and transferable and transmuted in this material from that ether. You cannot, it's not just some throwaway words. You will be affected by it if you have anything that is a diminished return or intention, or furthermore, these type of low frequency states. So they get instantly rejected. They it's almost like they burn up on entry, as if you're coming back from space into planet Earth. There's or reverse, you're going from Earth out into the stratosphere of the cosmos. You will burn up if you don't have the correct equipment to hold that. That's how it works. I mean, that's why it's so powerful. Everything is frequency. Everything is energy. And that's the mistake that a lot of people make. They believe that it's not, when that is the distortion. That's the delusion. The truth is, the nature of this is electromagnetism. That's it.
Yep, it's energy. It's all energy. Everything's energy.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
we can work it out. We'll set something up. We'll make it happen. But
well, it's going to be a rare one who wants to go on a podcast and talk about it. So it may take me a while to find one who's willing to do that. The stigma is incredible.
Yeah,
the stigma is incredible. A lot of them don't want anybody to know that they're hearing voices, because it's like, oh, you're crazy. You're mentally ill. You're sick. But
they'll be the one. Right now, you don't have the one. I could see that quite clearly. But give yourself a month or two, and you'll find the one. I'm sure these people are coming at you left, right, and center.
They're always coming at me, but having one that is willing to go on video. Now they might be able to go on with their voice, just their voice only. With
maybe an overshadowed like silhouette or something.
Or silhouette like that. I don't know. Can you do that from your end?
Yeah,
shadow somebody.
Yeah, shadow someone's pretty easy. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to watch this stuff, but it just doesn't hold. And it's quite frankly, these energy. I remember this one case that I had, and this husband and wife had adopted a daughter, and individually, without talking to each other, were constantly being drawn to the kitchen of their house at 2 a.m. in the morning with the voice of their daughter going, "Mommy, mommy." And they'd walk out to the kitchen and there was nothing. And then they'd walk back to the daughter's bed and she's laying in her bed. And this happened to both the husband and wife because they slept in separate rooms. And it took me intervening and having them confess to each other they were both experiencing the same thing. Now, that entity was a doozy. And that came from some, I'm just going to say it, a possessed megalomaniac that raped and murdered his niece. And the niece was still being commandeered by this demonic energy that was presenting itself as the niece. This, I was doing a healing on this woman, and literally we're in a stark black room, and light opens up as if someone opened the door. And this girl walked right up to me and stood next to me, looking up, going, "Hi, I'm here waiting for my parents." And like the client could feel the energy in the room because part of it was the allure. Let's bring this energy out because the energy loves the darkness. It's the absorption of all light. That's the purpose of it. Remember that. And if they can use that to their advantage, they will. And so this girl had a conversation with me, and the client was like, "Holy shit, I can feel something going on in here." And so I continued the conversation. Then it went south, and it presented itself as something very ominous. And I exercised the energy, but it was the whole freaking house. They ended up bulldozing the house. It was so bad.
Wow.
Sometimes that's present. It's so transmuted so deep into the space itself. There's very little to no option. Once you exercise that energy and then you create a new grid and framing around the property, then you have to start looking at, okay, what do you want to do with it? And the permanency of the transmission was deep within the whole bricks, the house, everything. It was so bad. It was such a heinous murder. And,
Now, what are those entities go? Well, you bulldoze the house down. Do they still stay in that area?
Oh, no. When I exercise them, they never return. They just dissolve into love.
Well, what if you said the house was full of them? They bulldozed the house.
Well, they imprinted, imbued that in deep into the material, like it was everywhere. It's like if you were dowsing, you wouldn't be able to stand there. It was so overwhelming. And so what that is like if you imagine you're an exterminator trying to get rid of like pestilent rodents, whatever, it's just a trail for another entity to get a taste, to come back to that very space. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that is the charge. It's like, oh, okay, there's not much we can do here. Boom, let's go. Bulldoze it. And so, when you get rid of the charge, then and they were just like so committed to getting out of there, getting rid of the house, whatever. It was freaky for them. I mean, I was sitting in their lounge area, their family room, and watching this energy attempting to enter my physical body. I thought it was fascinating. It's only you can't be in any state of fear. Like if you think that, like it was like the Blob or the Metal Man from the Terminator attempting to merge into my physical flesh. And, there's no entry or exit for you in this space, my friend. You don't have the juice and the resonance that I do, and you're going to go back to where you came.
I felt the same kind of thing when I was working. It started off in the prison, and then when I went to work psych crisis in the emergency rooms, is I could feel their presence. It was like an icky electrical feeling. I never could hear them. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. And there was no other feel like it. The closest thing to it was getting the chills, but it wasn't quite like that.
No.
It was just this icky electrical presence. And I'd working in the ERs, I'd, bring a patient in, start interviewing him to do a psych crisis on him. And I'd ask them, "You hearing voices?" And they'd say, "No." I'd tell them, "Yes, you are. And this is how strong they are." I could feel it. I could feel it, them getting angry. And what they got angry at the most was when I told the patient that these things were parasites, that they were feeding off them. They went berserk. You could just feel them. It was just, the air was full of electricity. They hated that, But I was always afraid that maybe one of those patients would tell a psychiatrist what I said. And then it'd be, I was always on pins and needles there. So I was very careful about which ones I told. And still I had to be careful, because psychiatry go, "What are you telling these people this stuff for?"
Exactly.
They'll slit your throat.
Yep, pretty much. All right, my friend. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, this conversation. I got to tell you, we'll have to do a part 2 and have you back on the channel, and we'll go further into exploration of getting that set up so we can get this exorcism going. And
I'd say if I can't find one that would come on with both of us, because I'd like to see what you do also.
Yeah. You're extremely sensitive to the energy. That will be very apparent. And,
well, they got me through the screen of the computer once. They actually came through, and I could feel them
Oh yeah,
hitting me through. There's no time or space for them.
yeah, yeah. No, it's evident. It's evident everywhere. So I'm going to put all your social sphere into the web under this podcast, and have people come and discover some of your findings and your journey of self exploration and helping people find and remember who they are. And this is, the more of this information needs to be known rather than being caught in this ridiculous.
Yeah, they don't want it out there. I mean, the people from the MACE organization went to one of the universities in Australia and said, "Hey, listen, you should be teaching this instead of this
Nonsense.
stuff you're teaching, the nonsense that's not working." They demonstrated to them how it worked. They said, "If you give us the patent for it, we'll take it." They said, "No, we're not going to give you the patent." So they went to the legislature. They ran sessions with the legislature. They saw that it worked, and said to the legislature, "You should be using this in your mental health centers instead of this garbage taught by the universities." They just blew it off. So there's not going to be any support from the mainstream on this energetic therapy. They don't understand it. They don't think that anything like this exists, and they don't want to change.
Yeah, yeah. No, we'll blow the roof off it, my friend. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll see if I can't find somebody that'll come on with the both of us. So
Yeah, yeah.
and then I'd love to see how you do. How you do it.
Yeah, yeah. You'll experience the whole thing. Don't you worry about that.
Oh, wonderful.
You can't when you're a witness, you will experience it, and of course there's always parameters. It's not like there's anything penetrating your state, and I'll make sure that it's like handling battery acid. You need to be a little mindful, but it's fun to witness the unraveling. And furthermore, what actually happens is like it's a huge expansion of energy as they reclaim it. It's wild how much that person is being.
It's the same thing with the MACE energy, but again, it's not with that's due to programming that was caused by a trauma, and they can feel the energy return immediately. They feel lighter, they feel clearer. But this is not an entity. There's a difference between the two.
Oh, absolutely.
This is psychological programming that we can get out. The entity is a whole different ballpark.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Everything still separates you. Whatever's taking your energy, there is a separation.
Yeah.
That's definitely. All right, my friend. Oh, last one question. What's your definition of spiritual consciousness?
Spiritual crutches?
Consciousness.
Wow, what a question. I guess the simplest thing would be to the awareness that you are basically a spirit.
Yeah, love it.
You're not a body. This is a car. This is your vehicle. You're the one driving that. And that spiritual consciousness is susceptible because it is spirit. It's susceptible to other infringements by other spiritual entities that we share this space with. They're around us all the time.
Love it. Love it. Beautiful. Thank you, my dear friend. I've done hundreds of these podcasts. No one's ever said the same thing, as it shouldn't be. This is your experience. This is your realization. And that is a mastered skill to whatever the answer is. It is correct.
This whole planet, this whole universe is run by an infinite, all-knowing intelligence.
Yeah.
That's in control. Even though it doesn't look like it sometimes, it's in control. Everything works for the best.
Perfection. Yeah. Beautiful. All right, my friend. Well, I want to thank you. I want to thank the universe for bringing you into my life. I want to thank the audience for sharing their time with us today. And I am your humble servant and seafood Taoist Master Sanqing. And I'll see you on the next one, guys.